Here we go.
Such a good girl.
All right, everyone. Hello and welcome back. If you all can hear me, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, awesome. Good stuff. Just gonna wait for a few more people to get in, and then I am gonna ask my team if you all could just monitor the participant box, and we can just admit people as we go. That would be great. And again, just want to say a thank you. I know it can get very exhausting coming on after a long work day or job searching or whatever you are up to, but this is greatly appreciated that we have you here tonight. We are full of some amazing speakers, some great colleagues, friends of mine, other people that are very influential, at least from my perspective in the community. So very excited to have them here with us. So let's get started. I'm going to head to the next slide. Before we really do get into the meat of everything, we do want to dedicate tonight's episode to two women that we are very, feel very passionate about in their presence in the community. And for those that are aware of Breonna Taylor, the indictment was announced today. So for those that aren't familiar with the Breonna Taylor case, I do encourage you to do some research on your own. Breonna Taylor was a 26-year-old African-American woman who was fatally shot by the Louisville Metro Police Department. And those three police officers entered her apartment with her boyfriend executing a no-knock search warrant. So the officers fired over 20 shots and Taylor was shot 5 times. And there were updates today for those that were in touch with the news. I actually know some people from this series are out protesting in DC right now, just with the upset news that the grand jury decided that they didn't charge any officers with shooting Breonna Taylor. But they actually did indict one officer out of 3 on 3 counts of the wanton endangerment in first degree. So I know that's a pretty unfamiliar term for most of us, but what that means is a felony that carries a sentence of up to 5 years in prison for each count if the officer is found guilty. And he wasn't even charged for Breonna Taylor's murder. He was charged with 1 account for each of the neighboring occupants in the apartment next door. So again, a lot of justice that still needs to be served for Breonna and her family. So we're dedicating tonight's episode to her. And then we are also dedicating tonight's episode to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So she was an incredible influence to our justice system and to women's rights. And so today she was honored as a pioneer of women's rights who brought the nation so much closer to its vision of equal justice as an amazing lawyer and also as a justice on the bench. So tonight, these are our ladies of honor. So let's get into the meat of everything. So tonight's episode is focusing on listening and amplifying voices. So this will be led by myself and Lucy. And the agenda for this evening is going over the importance of listening. So we'll be touching on that. We'll also be having 3 different segments of speakers. So again, very excited to introduce them all to you. So our first is actually going to be, and I'm sorry that these are a little, these aren't in order, but we'll be hearing a female Asian experience perspective, and then we'll do a female Black experiences perspective, and then a male Black experiences perspective, and then we'll go into our breakout groups, a listening activity, and then a large forum discussion. So we're going to head to our next slide, and so with this, it's actually going to showcase Asian American voices. So with this, I personally feel that the Asian American voice is very much so overshadowed. I know specifically with COVID-19 being something that has increased discrimination with the Asian American community, I think it's very important that we allow this time to hear these voices. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen real quick, and I'm going to share my screen with another one. Let's see. And before I start, can you all give me the thumbs up if you can see this screen? It says opinion. Okay, awesome. So we'll get started on this.
I think the conversations that I had about race with my family was primarily led by my dad, and it would just be in little lessons. Like, I'd pick up the phone and I'd say hello, and he goes, "I can tell you're Korean over the phone." I was like, "It's because I am Korean and I'm on the phone with you." And he goes, no one should be able to tell you're Korean on the phone. People should just think you're American."
When my parents talked about Americans, they clearly meant white Americans. When they meant any other kind of Americans, they named them. They said Black people or Latinos or Native American Indians was the language they would use for Native people. And so I understood early on that a real American was a white American and everybody else had to be qualified.
Well, Asian American to me is a political identification, not like Democratic or Republican, but meaning, a way to organize, a group identification that has political implications and meaning and power and strength.
Wearing this skin color is a big deal to me, which is why I don't say I'm just American anymore, because I'm not. Because America doesn't see me as just American.
My first experience with race was when I was 6 years old. I fell in love with this girl named Janice, and I went up to her in the sandbox, and I was like, "Janice, I love you." And she was like, "You're the color of poop." And that was memory number one with racism. And I didn't know what that was. I just took that literally. I was like, "What? No, it's not rubbing off." Like, it was very terrifying.
These children around me already had the racial epithets to use against me. It's the first time in my life, of course, that I heard, chink and jap and gook.
When I was in second grade, I used to walk a little bit to the bus stop away from my school, and there was a boy who used to beat me up. And when he used to beat me up, he used to call me the N-word, which I didn't quite know what it meant, but I knew that it was something negative. People who evoke the most fear in me is 10-year-old white boys. I will cross the street. My dad used to run a small business, and I remember people coming in who weren't Korean, and just white customers coming in, and they would just tell my dad to go back to his country. And this is before my dad had a full grasp on the English language. And I remember seeing my dad's hands being balled up in fists underneath the counter, but my dad just saying, "Okay, thank you, come back soon."
Well, my dad, he grew up during a very interesting time in India's sort of development and growth. So he grew up when partition happened. And during the time of partition, there was a lot of aggression. So for him to hear my stories of microaggression, he just didn't have a whole lot of room or empathy to understand what it meant. Because he's like, "I'm dealing with full-on aggression. I've seen full-on riots and people be killed. Fine, kids call you Saddam Hussein. Just deal with it. We have an amazing opportunity here. We have freeways, Wi-Fi, and Jamba Juice. You better go be president. No excuses."
I had enough of stereotyping and targeting and not knowing who I was, that I decided, okay, I wanted to become invisible. I didn't want any eyes on me. So I took a big step of basically taking off my turban, cutting off my hair, and that worked for a while.
But I find that the Asian American community as a whole, even the young community, they're very complacent about justice and race. And I think it's because, actually I know it's because a lot of them buy into the model minority myth. They don't really think in terms of immigration flows.
Immigration was opened in 1965 to professional Asian families, so we were really chosen and creamed from our countries.
And that ties into the model minority myth that characterizes the Asian American community as high achieving, apolitical, and just assimilated within the broader context of quote unquote American society. And that's a very pernicious myth.
I think it's a way to pit Asian Americans against African Americans in particular, to say, look, this racial group is doing so much better. They're able to do X, Y, and Z.
Was I ever a model minority? Of course. I was a good student, and I mean, that's probably the extent of it. But you know, I had a cousin who had a murder rap.
You know, I was the only Asian kid in Ridgewood, in a working class neighborhood. And then when I went to high school, I hung out with gangs. I got into a lot of trouble, and I barely made it into college.
This is home for me. You know, the Bronx is home for me. And I think that growing up with Black, brown folks, you know, again, determines like our political alignment and solidarity work on like Black Lives Matters and things like that, because we came from the same community, you know, we lived in the same ghettos, and we know what it means to be invisible and abandoned by the U.S.
When you look at more deeply within our own communities and how we play our role and how we're treated even differently within colorism and the spectrum of our skin tone, you know, Vietnamese people are treated differently and better than Cambodians or Lao people or Hmong people because we're lighter. And I think with our own communities, we have to acknowledge that privilege of our skin color, and how we play a role being complacent and not being complacent and fighting back against what the system is between white supremacy and anti-Blackness and everything in between the systems that upholds those two.
It's very, you know, keep your head down, eyes in your own lane, and make sure things are better for us. And I think that I saw that a lot growing up, and I've definitely thought that at some point in my life, where I would see injustices happening to other groups of people in this country, and I would tell myself, no, but you have your own things to worry about. You need to make sure that things are better for you. But then I realized when I grew up that it's not any of us that have the problem. It's the system that's the problem. And, you know, when the tide rises, all boats rise. So we need to stand by each other and we need to support one another.
So I'm going to just bring us back to the main presentation real quick. Alrighty, awesome. So again, that is a wide variety of perspectives from the Asian American community, which again, I think is a community that is overshadowed, and we're so fortunate that Jenn Kimm, a classmate of mine and a friend, is willing to speak. So Lucy, I will let you take it away.
Okay, Jenn is a University of Michigan Go Blue alum and currently works for a nonprofit foundation as a grant maker. In her free time, she enjoys rock climbing, snowboarding, and pretty much anything that keeps her outside, which clearly is her happy place. All right, we have about 4 questions, and Jenn, number 1, tell us a bit about your upbringing and how it has impacted your view on race in the world.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So for this is a really big question, but I guess I'll start with growing up. Well, first, I'm Korean, and growing up as a Korean person in America, I had really different expectations set on me by my parents and then the rest of society. Pretty much, if I wasn't Korean enough for my parents, then I would get in trouble by them. And if I wasn't American enough in school and literally everywhere else, I wouldn't fit in. So balancing the two, I've only like just begun to embrace my culture. So balancing the two growing up, there pretty much was no balance. I just was like pretty bitter and resented a lot of people that I wasn't white, and I just wanted to be white so badly. A lot of the racism that I felt as an Asian American was in the form of microaggressions, which a lot of times I don't even like that word, because when you say microaggressions, it makes it sound like it's not real and it's like so small and micro that it shouldn't really affect you. But microaggressions build up into a lifetime of microaggressions. So a lifetime of that really shapes who you are and how you view yourself and how you believe other people view you. So a lot of the microaggressions that I experienced growing up daily was racial slurs, pretty much like, people are shocked when I say pretty much every day, but I mean pretty much every day. And I lived in Baltimore City growing up too, so I'd see a lot of people all the time, and I'd just be in constant interaction with people. So there were a lot of opportunities for these things to happen. So a lot of racial slurs, a lot of things like go back to China, making fun of my parents for their accent. Every time there was another Asian person anywhere, I would always be asked if I was related to them. One, like stupid things like that, but then also things like I distinctly remember in middle school when we had just learned, we had a substitute teacher, and substitutes always used to play those stupid videos on the VCR players, and it was about culture around the world. And when it got to Asia, it showed like a pretty much naked Asian woman with like geisha makeup on, and the point was to show, or the narrator was literally saying that Asian women are submissive. So after that, everyone, and I went to a Catholic school, and everyone, like all the boys, everyone would, you know, say things like, sorry for language, but things like suck my dick, like you're Asian, you're submissive. So one boy pulled his pants down and whipped his penis out at me, saying, you know, like, and it was all because of that video and us learning that Asian women were submissive. So things like that. But that was like a constant. I was really used to that kind of thing. And so while I was never physically assaulted because of my race, all the accumulated microaggressions did make me feel very, very like otherized all the time. I was very acutely aware of the fact that I did not fit in, and that no one believed that I fit in, and that I didn't belong. And after a lot of, like, this stuff happened a lot, especially in middle school, and then I finally got the courage to tell one of my teachers about it. And he was a white male, and my best friend dragged me up there, and she told him everything that had been happening, and I said, like, yeah, I've been being bullied a lot because of this. And he just looked at me and said, well, what do you want me to do about it? And that was kind of like a look into what the rest of my life was going to be, with this racism towards Asian people not being viewed as a real thing, and not being viewed as a hurtful thing that really breaks people down. So yeah, so growing up, I really hated my race. I hated that I wasn't white. I hated that I looked different, that people could pull their eyes back and show me that that's what they saw me as. And so it's taken me a really long time to embrace my culture, but I think because of my upbringing in that way, it's helped me embrace my culture even more, because now that I'm older and I'm more mature, I'm like, what? Like, I was so embarrassed of the fact that I spoke Korean and that my parents speak Korean, and I was so embarrassed of their accent that I would even lie to my parents about school functions because I didn't want them to come, because I didn't want people to make fun of them. And I was so ashamed of everything that had to do with my culture. But now I'm like, well, I speak 2 languages fluently. I like just everything about it. Like, I have 2 whole different cultures that I can embrace, and now I can look back and appreciate that. But it was definitely really hard growing up, and I did not like being Asian.
Thank you, Jen. My goodness, thank you. The next question references the issue of model minority. Do you feel that Asian Americans are often used by white supremacists to further oppress Black people?
So the video we just watched actually touched on it a little bit, but yes, I think the model minority myth is a perfect example. It's something that's been used by white supremacy to say, look, Asian people were also discriminated against, but they made it. And so if they can make it, then like Black people have no excuse. And that's something that white supremacy uses to pit race, minority against minority, and it creates this race war. And the truth of the matter is, like, yes, Asian people did face things like incarceration camps. So like Japanese people after World War II were put into incarceration camps. There was the Chinese Exclusion Act in the 1800s, and there were these things that definitely set Asian people back in this country and made us feel like we did not belong here. But that discrimination was totally different and had totally different effects than police brutality, slavery, segregation, and all the other ways that the dehumanization of Black people has literally been institutionalized in America. So like the model minority myth doesn't even, like, to use that against the Black community makes no sense, because it's not even comparing the same thing. And but like we hear the model minority, and for me, I have always viewed it as something that creates a race war, like the Rodney King riots, for example. Like, I won't go into that because I don't think I have enough time for that. But all this to say, I think white supremacy is the reach is so extensive that it has the power to pit, anyone who's not white against each other. And I think the model minority myth is a huge one that I hope people will realize is not, like, it's not a thing.
Good. Okay, thanks. All right. Do you find that COVID-19 has increased Asian American racism? If so, is there an experience that you might feel comfortable sharing?
Definitely. If you look at resources like NextShark on social media, there's a lot of news outlets that cover it too, but that document all the reports of instances of racism against Asian people because of COVID. And I mean, yeah, there were, like, I'm sure a lot of people here saw too, there were videos that went viral that where Asian people were being taunted and hit and just, were treated really badly for no reason other than being Asian, because Trump kept calling it the Chinese virus. And yeah, so the association with COVID being from Asia. So after that, I got really nervous for my parents because they live and work in Baltimore City and I'm not there. I live in Baltimore City, but I'm currently living with my partner in the Poconos right now with his family for other reasons. And so I was really nervous about my parents because they walk to and from work, and they're old. So and like a lot of the videos that were going viral were targeted towards elderly Asian people. So I was really worried. So I called my mom, and I told her, and I just told her, like, there's a lot of people being really racist towards Asian people right now. So just be careful. Make sure you're always with someone. Like, please don't walk around by yourself. And she just laughed at me and was like, Jennifer, like, nothing's going to happen. And my parents have been in Baltimore City for the past 27 years. So it's like their community. And so they had no reason to worry, because that's one thing I love about Baltimore, that like the community is, everyone looks out for each other. And so they didn't have any reason to worry, but I remember like just feeling so nervous that something was going to happen to them. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, great. And your last question. When it comes to unintentionally offending or discriminating against any minority individual, how should someone apologize for the harm they caused without putting their white guilt on the Black or minority individual?
So again, this is just from my perspective. I'm sure, I'm sure I think differently from a lot of other people. So I'm only speaking for myself here. But I would want the other person to apologize to me and identify the harm that they caused to me, just because I would want them to know that they can't do that to other people. And I would want to make sure that they knew that going forward, they wouldn't. So I guess that's one reason why, but also it's just hurtful. So, I mean, who wouldn't want to hear an apology for something that harmed them? And I understand why some people wouldn't want to, and I understand where this question is coming from. Because racism is so, it like hurts people. It hurts you so deeply that even an apology, if worded the wrong way or anything, could further offend that person. So I think an apology is warranted whether that person's going to be offended or not, to be honest, because you don't know until you apologize. And I think it's worse if you don't. So, yeah.
That is good to know. And I thank you for such deep sharing. Thank you.
Awesome. Again, yeah, thank you, Jen, and thank you, Lucy, for facilitating. I am going to share my screen again. Just give me one moment. All right, there we go. So we're just going to hop back into the meat of it all. All right, so this is a video. We're going to hop into Black Voices. And again, this is showcasing the trauma of those in the Black community that come from their reality that they live and they see every day. And again, it's so important to know that, you know, Jenn's Asian American experience is different than so many others. And there's not one clear path to everyone's to voice and experiences. So again, we'll be seeing a multitude of different Black voices, but this is a video to kick us off and kind of give us some insight.
I just like open Instagram and everything is like blacked out.
But I guess to me the thing about the black squares is that's a black square for 24 hours and then you're done with it and you can move on kind of. But for Black people it's like our whole body is covered in a black square.
Yeah.
And we carry it with us everywhere we go.
How do I feel? I feel exhausted, I feel angry, I feel upset, I feel frustrated.
I feel overwhelmed with rage that things like this are still occurring across the world in the big 21st century.
I have to continue to see Black people from around the world brutalized by people who want to abuse their power.
It was so disappointing to hear people saying they were shocked on social media. How can you be shocked about something that people have been talking about since 2013?
I feel genuinely baffled as to how it is 2020 and yet us Black people still need to campaign to be treated like our life matters.
I think about this often, about what exactly separated me from the Michael Browns, the Kendra Jameses, the Jordan Edwards, the Tamir Rices.
This isn't just a single issue and it's not just about George Floyd, it's about, do you know Tamir Rice? Tamir Rice in like 2016 or something.
He was 12 years old at the time when he was shot in cold blood when he was carrying a toy that the police officers believed was a gun.
Right, and so it's just like it doesn't matter if you're 12 or if you're 100 because if you're Black, there's always sort of this like justification for violence against you.
We feel that we need protection from police and yet they're supposed to be the ones making us feel most safe.
And then we will forget until that hashtag, whether it's George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Mark Duggan, until that dies down and then the next hashtag trend comes along.
While I can respect that non-Black people are doing, that some non-Black people are doing their part in trying to educate themselves about what Black Lives Matter really means, fundamentally, my life is not a trend.
Something that myself and many Black people across the world need everyone to know is that we'll still be Black tomorrow. This isn't a trend. It's not a trend to talk about the importance of Black lives.
The past 2 days have been heartbreaking and distressing.
This has to have an impact on our mental health, constantly seeing brutalized Black bodies that could easily be us if we were there.
The youth as a collective are finally sick and tired of, you know, what's going on in the world and we are finally doing something about it.
The famous words of Martin Luther King, our lives begin to end when we become silent about things that matter. Being Black means to be powerful, educated, talented.
Feeling the solidarity with my brothers and sisters that lets us mourn together, that lets us stand together and lets us speak up together.
Just really proud to be Black at the moment.
We will not rest because if there is no justice, then there will not be any peace.
All right, so again, that is a group of Black individuals with where their heart and heads are at with the social climate of the world. And so again, please just give these speakers your undivided attention, and I will pass it along to Lucy again for an intro.
We are very fortunate to have Nadia, who is on the left, and Jordan on the right, be speaking with us today about their experiences being Black women in America. I'll introduce both right now at the same time. Nadia is a government and public services consultant with experience in federal and state government, advocacy, and research institutions. If she were to identify with two fictional characters from American TV, it would be Amy Santiago from Brooklyn Nine-Nine and Issa Rae from Insecure. Jordan, as a registered critical care nurse, recognizes the importance of breaking racial barriers, dismissing stereotypes, and constantly assessing her potential racial bias when caring for sick patients. As a facilitator of the Red, White, and Black series, Jordan not only has the opportunity to narrate her experience as a Black woman in America, but is also afforded the gift of listening and learning about the viewpoints of others. So I'm going to be alternating between Jordan and Nadia, and we will begin with Jordan. Jordan, how was your home life different from your school life?
Sure. So, for me in particular, I have always, for most of my school life, I've been in private schools, and for high school in particular, I was in a predominantly white high school. I went to NDP, which a lot of people here I know are NDP alum. And so I grew up in a not so great part of East Baltimore City. And so I would go to school and these girls would like talk about their lives in a way that I could literally not relate to in any way. I mean, even the socioeconomic difference, my family, just to be blunt, my family is pretty poor and the girls at NDP are pretty wealthy. And so it was very strange to go to school and fit in with them academically and still be able to succeed academically, but just to notice how different the other side lives, I think. And I think just the exposure to like the genuine and not even malintended ignorance of some of my classmates was very like startling and difficult for me to process as a teenager. And then to go back home and be in a community where like my parents would literally not even let us play outside. Like we have no like real ties to anyone in the community because we went to school, we went to work, and we came home and we closed the door. So I think that like startling difference, it didn't make me feel like I was like living a double life or anything like that. I've always been a very transparent person, and I was very transparent about what my home life was like with the classmates that I did communicate with. But it was, and my community is predominantly Black as well. So it was very different and very eye-opening. And I think one of the first introductions to me realizing some of the like racial injustice, discrimination, and as Jen mentioned, microaggressions that maybe weren't really so micro.
Awesome. Thank you. Nadia, at what age did you identify that your race was different from others?
Yeah, thanks so much guys for having me here. And I just wanted to, before I answer this, chime in really quickly with the microaggression thing. Some literature suggests in critical race theory that you can, refer to it as a micro trauma instead of a microaggression because it's not, it's a traumatic event. And I think that is a little bit more illustrative of how each little trauma, like little T trauma incident, builds up to a bigger T trauma. So just wanted to.
Thank you for that.
Start using that, Nadia. I like that a lot.
That's a good one. I use that all the time. Micro trauma. I'm like, it is not a microaggression. It is a micro trauma. Yeah. Okay. So sorry. Back to the question.
So when did you identify that your race was different from others?
Yeah. So, and this is just a neutral example. And I'm sure, like, if I asked my mom, like, she could have identified other negative examples, but when you're at such a young age, you don't really grasp onto everything under the surface. So my example is when I was, I think, about 5 years old, and I was in competitive dancing. So like, think of Dance Moms type, if you're familiar with that. And so we had to style our hair, and the girls at the studio were actually very supportive, and they loved my hair. I was in a predominantly white community, and people really liked to see my curls. Of course, they were touching it all over the place, but at 5, like, I didn't mind as much because when there's a 5-year-old child, it's appropriate to like, like cool over them. So another one of my peers who was also around 5, she asked me like, oh, like, what do you put in your hair? And growing up, I just used leave-in conditioner and Vaseline just because that's very normal to me. And like, that's just what I put in my hair to preserve the curls because my mom didn't use gel. And so she goes, okay. And this peer of mine, she was white. And so we came back the next day and her mom like came in with her and her mom was like so upset. And then like I see the little girl's name was Abigail. I see Abigail's face like all down. And then from the back, I can just see her hair entirely slicked back in Vaseline. And at that moment, it occurred to me, we are very different. We are just very different. And that's not, that's a little bit more of a lighthearted example. That's, neutral, but I just remember in that moment, it hit me and I was like, no, we do different things to our bodies and it has different results, So that's a little fun, cute example of when I first understood we're very different.
Thank you. Jordan, in what environments do you feel judged by your Blackness? Like either too Black or not Black enough, the Oreo thing, the whitest Black person I know, yada, yada, yada. Okay.
Yeah, so I would say this kind of started in high school, but I am still experiencing it to this day. When I'm in predominantly white spaces, I'll actually start with my family. Like with my family, the way that I speak and I guess some of the schools that I went to is very different than just the tone of voice or even the language that some of my family members use. So my cousins would always joke and call me white girl or would even call me like the Oreo of the family, my sister too. So like in predominantly Black spaces, even in my own family, it's sometimes where I just feel like maybe I'm not Black enough, or I have in the past. I've self-actualized a lot and done a lot of soul searching. But I would say in the context of being around my family, I feel like I'm not Black enough to like totally fit in with the way that they are. And sometimes I feel like my sister and we stick out like sore thumbs. But then in predominantly white spaces, such as my workplace, in my full-time job at Hopkins, I am one of 3 Black people in the department. So just to give you an example, we have to wear caps all day because we're in a surgical procedure area. And so it is a spectacle every morning with all of my coworkers watching me try to fit my hair into the surgical caps that we have to wear. And so even when my hair is not in braids like it is right now, it is naturally big. And so it takes me 2 caps to put it on, or even me discussing my music interests or things like that in a predominantly white space. Those are times where I feel heightened awareness of my Blackness, and not even that I feel too Black, but I think it's just that I feel a heightened awareness of my Blackness. And so I think that and that was even for my very first job at 16, all of my workplaces have been predominantly white. So I think for me growing up, it has been a little bit confusing and not necessarily an identity crisis, but just trying to figure out okay, I want to be Black enough around my family and I want to be comfortable with that same level of Blackness in the workplace. But then there's this hyper awareness of, okay, well, I'm one of the only Black people here and maybe one of the few Black people that this predominantly white space will interact with. So it feels like a huge responsibility to represent Black women and represent the Black community in the best way that I can, so that, if any of the people in this predominantly white community, whatever negative predisposed stereotypes or conceptions they have about Black people, that I don't embody any of those things. So I think it's like a constant, struggle almost, or it has been a constant struggle to find that happy medium. And I'm really grateful that I've done so much like self-reflection, and honestly with this series, so much learning and sharing this with other people, that I've realized I'm just going to be me in whatever space, and whatever happens is whatever feedback I get is what I get to, and kind of learning how to respond instead of me trying to learn how to act to fit the environment that I'm in.
Thank you. Thank you. Nadia, are you able to identify a time when you were being discriminated against? How did you feel and how did you react?
Yeah, when Maria told me about this, I was like, which time? Like, there's so many examples I could provide, but I'll provide an example that I had in high school, and I think it's good because it shows how it followed me, at least through my college career and my young adult life. So when I was a freshman in high school, my English teacher accused me of plagiarizing an essay because she literally said this to me, and this was after she ran it through the Code of Ethics board, that we had like the software where you could run essays in, and it would show you if it was plagiarized or not. And so she like made me go through the whole plagiarism thing, like after I told her I did not plagiarize this essay. And she literally told me she thought it was plagiarized because she didn't think I could write that well. And so that was like, I just felt a mix of feelings in the moment. And it was funny because I recently talked to one of my friends who I was very close with in high school, and she remembers me telling her that day, and we talked about my reaction. I was more of just confused. Like, I was hurt that like my teacher didn't believe in me, but I think at that moment I more just internalized what she said, and I thought what she said was truth. Because when you're younger, you're talking to your teacher, you assume what your teacher says is wise. So I really internalized that, and it really followed me through the rest of my high school and college career, because I really thought that I couldn't write well, or I had a lot of self-doubt in my academic abilities. And that showed itself through class. Like, I would always double like guess what I was trying to say, or I wouldn't speak up because I didn't know if it was correct or not, or I wouldn't volunteer for positions where my writing was on display because I thought that, I wasn't a good writer. So I felt at that moment pretty embarrassed, and I internalized everything that she said, and it followed me through my academic career, and it had real life consequences. And so I got over that. I, like Jordan, I did some soul searching, and thankfully I had really encouraging teachers, and throughout the later parts of my high school career and college as well. I had some pretty great mentors, but that stuff is real, and I'm sure that teacher doesn't even remember that interaction that we had. That was a total of like 5 minutes between the two times she grilled me about asking about the essay. And but that moment literally followed me for like 8 years of my life. So I think it's important to know, like, it's a micro trauma, that is a micro trauma that followed me and impacted how I interacted with the world and education.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. Okay, thank you. Jordan, again. What are your thoughts on the rioting and destruction of property and businesses that happens in the name of Black Lives Matter?
Sure. So this was one of the questions from the Uncomfortable Questions survey that we received from the last episode. And I really had to think about this one. And I have two feelings about it. One, the first thing that I felt was like almost even embarrassment, I think, because I felt like, okay, finally we're getting so much traction and people are paying attention to Black Lives Matter and people are paying attention to the movement, and then there's this destruction and looting that's happening by so few people that it's getting so much attention. And then I think with more research and educating myself, and especially I think the video that we watched on the very first episode, my feeling kind of changed to, okay, I don't really care that people are destroying property over this, you know? And it's a small amount of people. I actually saw this piece of literature that says that 93% of protests for racial justice have been peaceful and have not resulted in rioting and looting. And I just thought, you know, if we can protest this peacefully so that less than 7% have resulted in any type of violence or destruction, but when you compare the numbers for the number of police that are brutal against Black people and other minorities, I'm not really mad at that. You know, property can be replaced, lives cannot. And I that's a feeling that I stand by, and I think it receives a lot of controversial reactions, especially when I, you know, talk to even my coworkers about this, again, in a predominantly white workspace. And I have a coworker who has said, well, I just can't get behind it and whatever. I'm like, that is not the top priority, and that's not what we should be focusing on. All of this property can be replaced, and all of this money can be replaced, but lives cannot. And if people are at that point of rage and anger and it's only 7%, my honest and genuine opinion, you know, whether it's politically correct or not, is I don't care if you loot a Target over this. You know, it's Breonna Taylor has still to this day has not had any justice whatsoever. And if a lot of times in history, change has come from positive change has come after people get loud, after people make a scene. And sure, it might be destruction of property, but it's not mass killing of police officers. So I'm okay with it. And I don't feel as ashamed, like taking on the shame of my race of, man, why are we doing this when we're just trying to get our point across? Why do we have to, you know, why is it that, but also it's a lot of people who are not for the Black Lives Matter who have been doing destruction and looting, and then the Black Lives Matter movement and people who are actually peacefully protesting for racial justice are taking the blame for the destruction. So I'd be curious, out of that less than 7%, how much of it was actually done by supporters of the movement. At first I was embarrassed, and now I'm like, okay, that's just part of it.
Thank you. Okay. And Nadia, do you believe that people of color or minorities can be racist?
Yes, 100%, absolutely. So I follow Jordan on Instagram, and she posted something from the series, I think last week, and it was talking about how Black people, I think it was just Black people cannot be racist, but so at least how I define racist, I love Ibram X. Kendi. You should definitely read How to Be an Anti-Racist if you have the opportunity to, but I love his definition of racism and how he thinks about being a racist should not be static. You can't just tell somebody, oh, they are a racist, and that's it, you know, close the book, that's all they are. I think it's good to think about racism as a group of policies and stereotypes that support a system. So if you think of it like that, and not just being a racist, but do Black people make actions and support policies or stereotypes that support an oppressive system, suppressing other Black people? Absolutely, 100%. And that's often intertwines with class as well, too. And so, like, yeah, I didn't really go over the rules, Maria, with you, like what I should mention. But I definitely.
No, you're good, B. Speak your truth and speak what you feel.
Okay, so for example, like Candace Owens. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Candace Owens, but she's she's a pretty big conservative Black voice. And I think she's a prime example of a Black person who supports policies and constantly distribute stereotypes that oppress other Black people. So you should definitely look her up. She's controversial, and she gets a lot of airtime. So like, do your own research, make your own opinion. But to answer this question, for me, she's a perfect example.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And in the interest of time, we're going to wrap this up and thank Jordan and Nadia for the depth and the sensitivity with which they answered these great questions.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And just want to make sure I am unmuted, correct?
Correct.
Okay, awesome, great. I have a lot of stuff on my screen, so just want to make sure. Okay, great. So moving on, so I have the honor of introducing our next two speakers to share the male Black experiences and some uncomfortable questions that you all have submitted. So to our left, we have Michael. So Michael previously worked in insurance, but now works for Lowe's as an info security specialist. He got his undergrad from Dickinson College and played on the men's lacrosse team. He later went on to get his master's degree in cyber forensics from the University of Baltimore. Awesome. And then Lance, born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, 2009 graduate of St. Paul's School for Boys and 2013 graduate of Johns Hopkins University. He currently lives in Baltimore and works in finance, and feels that the Red, White, and Black series is his opportunity to expand the conversation of race in America and offer perspective and understanding and clarity. So I'm going to, again, just take this off, and then we can focus on our first speaker. So that'll be Lance. So Lance, I'm going to spotlight you. All right, so Lance, for the first question, do you prefer to be identified as Black or African American?
Okay, so me personally, I prefer to be called Black, simply because, like, I don't know, African American to me, like, I don't really know if my family is from Africa. They could be from the islands, they could be from, like, obviously slaves traveled from Africa to all those different places, but, like, you know how Jenn was just speaking about Asian Americans, but then she could also specialize it as Korean American as well. Like, when it's African American, like, yeah, I have friends whose parents are from Africa, so they're African American, but also Nigerian American. But I feel like, for me personally, call me Black just because, I don't know.
Hey, sounds fine with me, but I know this is a conversation topic that I feel like is definitely very much so individual to the person. Like from our last series, we had a speaker come in and she said that she preferred African American. So it really does, there is no answer. It really is a preference. So awesome. Thanks for sharing. All right, Michael, you are up. All right, so your question is in reference to the pre-work, the article Reflection of the Token Black Friend. Have you ever felt like the token Black friend?
So to this question, I actually looked up, and I read the article, I looked up the word token to kind of understand what it meant. And let me read it. It says, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, cartoons were mostly racially themed and depicted Blacks in token roles, where they are only there to create a sense of inclusiveness. Tokenism appears in advertising as well as other subdivisions of major media. So kind of two parts to this question. So as far as the word token, I never felt that my friends kind of just added me to their friend group for diversity. I always felt like I was in my friend group because I got along with the people and we all like shared the same interests, whether it be sports or music or stuff like that. But after reading the article and referring back to the article, yes, I kind of do feel like the token Black friend, because when racial issues do happen, my friends always come to me and kind of ask me for the Black opinion and see what I think about the issue.
Okay, yeah, no, totally. And I appreciate that because I know it's one of those phrases like you hear, but until you actually do investigating to understand the true meaning, it has, I'm happy that you gave us that too, perspective point. All right, so Lance, we have a question for you. And so that question is, did you ever have the talk growing up as a kid? And have you had this talk with your son?
Okay, so for those of you who don't know what the talk is, it's basically mind your P's and Q's. Don't act like you act here. Act civilized. Be yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. mind your manners, always be on point. And I know all that because I have had that talk. My mom had that talk with me when I was 7 years old, going to St. Paul's for the first time. She had that talk the very first time I went over my friend's house. She reminded me. She reminded me again when I went to college. So I've had to talk multiple times in my life. My son is 4, so I have not had to talk with him as of yet. But with everything going on, I'm starting to reevaluate my position because before I was going to probably wait until he was like 7 or 8 because I felt as though that would be the time where he could understand it a little bit better because that's when I had to talk. But with current events and how certain things are going, I'm certain that I'll need to speed this up.
No, yeah, definitely, especially with today's climate. And for those that don't know Lance's son, he is the cutest thing in the world. And I'm Aunt Maria proudly. All right. And then our next question is going to Michael. Let's see. Michael, I am going to ask you, what do you think about ACAB? All cops are bad. Are all cops really bad?
So no, I don't think all cops are bad. For one reason, my father was a state trooper for 8 years. And to this day, he's still in law enforcement. But also with that being said, with him being a police officer, he also did give me, as Lance was just saying, the talk on how to act around police officers if you get pulled over or if you're out with friends and they happen to approach you. So really, I just think that not all cops are bad, but you do have, in any profession, you have people who are not good at their job. And I think when it comes to cops, the ones who are not good at their job, they just mishandle the power that they have. And that's what makes them bad. But just because there's one bad person who does a bad job doesn't mean that everybody in the department is a bad person.
Yeah, no, I think that that's been a struggle, at least for me. It's like identifying, it's like, okay, well, I would hope that, you know, there are good people in these institutions, but it is good to hear a perspective, especially having your father as, you know, such a high power position in that institution does give you especially a lot of credibility behind that. So thank you for sharing. And then I do, Lance, this is probably one of the most uncomfortable questions we will get to tonight, but full faith that you will be able to answer this. So this question is, can you talk about the history of the N-word, what it means and why it is unacceptable to say in any circumstance?
So I'm sure, as everyone knows, the N-word was used as a term to slander Black people, keep them less than, derogatory term. Goes back to the slavery days of just a way of labeling, making Black people feel as though they're not humans, just having that term to be like, all right, well, there goes the niggas. So as far as using the term, I mean, as far as like a white person, don't use it. I'm sorry. Like, look, Chris Rock did a stand-up about it. A bunch of people have done stand-ups about it. Like, if you're a white person, don't use it. Just because, like, you don't know the feeling of seeing a white person saying the N-word and how that feels, what that, like, the feeling that instills in you, and knowing that there is absolutely nothing that you can do about it simply because if you do, you are that person. So don't, as far as Black people go, like, look, that's your preference. You want to say it. You don't, cool. Is it fair? No. Is it life? Yes.
Yeah, no, I definitely can say that. Obviously, I'm aware and I am very against the N-word. But let's say, for example, I am talking in conversation. I said, oh my gosh, I overheard someone saying, and I say the full word ER, but I'm explaining it to someone that I overheard the word. I know I could easily say the N-word, but like even like when I'm like storytelling, that's a no-go, correct?
Yep. Don't repeat it. Don't say it.
So even if like I'm like jamming out to Cardi B and it's the the N word, but like with the A. Like I can't, like that's a no-go as well. And I'm just saying this because I feel like these are
I know these are questions that'll come up. Look, trust me, I've had friends throughout my life come up to me and try to argue with me back and forth about how, oh, they're just in the moment, they're just rapping, blah, blah, blah. On the flip side of that, I've also had white friends come up to me and say, look, I don't say that word. I will never say that word, even while I'm rapping. I had one friend, he was from Philly in college. He listened to hardcore 90s rap. I have never heard him say the N-word once, and we used to blast rap music together. So for you to sit and say you're in the flow and you like, because look, all right, when white people are around each other, yes, they rap and they say the N-word. We all know, like, I'm not going to say it and sugarcoat it. It is what it is. But when you rap that same song around a black person and the N-word comes up, what always happens when the white person comes around? They look at the black person to see if they're looking, to see if they can say it or not.
Right. No, totally. And again, there's so many different circumstances, but it's very evident that today's day and age, and should have always been, that it's just not a word that should come from a non-black person's mouth, or really anyone's mouth. But that's just my opinion. I just hate the word in general.
Like I said, it's up, as far as black people go, that's your discretion. Like, look, if you feel as though it's your power, you take it back, go for it. Like we had last session, we had an individual say, like, he doesn't use it, he doesn't like using it at all. So, like, that's how it goes. Like I said, is it fair? No, but like, America's not fair to me, so there we go.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I'm happy that you said that, because that's beyond all the other valid reasons that you just mentioned. Yes. So this is going to be the last question that we have for Michael for tonight. Let's see, Michael, storytelling is often the best way to share an experience. Is there a story that you feel comfortable sharing that has made you the Black man that you are today?
So I thought about this, and really I don't have any stories about myself that I can think of, but what I do have, I have like the men in my family. They're strong, successful Black men, and they have plenty of stories that they have told me and have passed on to me. And each one of them, they just provided me with guidance that shaped me kind of into who I am today. And they taught me what it means to be a Black man in this country and to be proud of who I am. And kind of without them, I wouldn't be where I am today or who I am today. So really no personal story, but I guess the stories of people in my family kind of building me up and making me who I am.
Awesome. And I do remember, don't you have a younger cousin or nephew?
Yes, I have my youngest cousin's my godson. He's 7 years old.
Gotcha. So if you were to give him some words of wisdom going forward, and again, I know this is completely off the cuff because I didn't ask you this in advance, but is there any wisdom that you would want to share with him going into? And again, you can think about it. I just wanted to ask, but we can let you think about it, and then I can ask Lance his last question if you need some time to think.
I can kind of go. I would just say, be proud of being Black. Don't let people shame you for the color of your skin. And just also, again, kind of like Lance was saying with the talk, give him the talk, let him know, yes, you are Black. This is America. And you would think, since we're in 2020, things would be, everybody is equal. But unfortunately, we're not equal. So be proud of who you are, but also kind of watch out for yourself. And I don't want to say overstep boundaries, because you should be able to do what you want. But unfortunately, it's not that way for Black people. So yeah, no, it's tough to say. But I guess the biggest thing I would say is just be proud of who you are and don't hide that.
No, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. I know it was, again, off cuff, and I didn't give that question to you up front. So thanks for going with it. So Lance, last question for this segment is going to go to you. What is your response to the charges indicted to Brett Hankinson, who was one of the 3 cops involved in the Breonna Taylor death?
Okay, so I've been thinking about how to answer this since you asked me earlier. Because my initial response was very, I I'll say not for this series. It was very profanity laced, anger filled. So I didn't want to come on here and rant and rave and curse and stuff because that kind of distracts from the situation. I just I just want to make this simple point and kind of just leave it at that and just show you how BS the American justice system is. The four walls in Breonna Taylor's neighbor's apartment got more justice than she did today. And that's all you need to think about. The cop got charged for shooting into the apartment. He didn't get charged for shooting her. He didn't get charged for shooting into her apartment. At this point, I'm just I'm shaking right now just because I don't want to let my anger just kind of take over me. But it's just kind of to the point to where it's just I'm not upset. I'm not mad. I expected this. I'm a black man in America. She's a black woman in America. We don't really have rights. Yeah, we can make money and live the American lifestyle, but when it comes to actual rights and laws and stuff, look at what they're trying to do as far as the voting situation is going with certain people, moving certain closing certain polling places in districts and making it harder for certain black people who or certain people who have to commute with public transportation, which is predominantly African American and minorities. Yeah.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of emotions.
A lot, and honestly and truthfully, if I'm not supposed to get political, but I honestly don't care.
It's okay. Go for it. I told you.
If you agree in any way, shape, or form with this decision, I honestly kind of feel sorry for you because you don't value human life. Honestly, at this point, forget law, forget all that. This situation was fucked up. A woman was in her house. Her door got rammed in, no knock warrant. I'm sorry, if I'm in my house and someone busts down my door, what am I going to do and I have a gun? I'm shooting. I'm sure 99% of you would do the same.
And I appreciate the rawness of your response because we're not here to sugarcoat anything. That's why this series exists, and that's why I feel so fortunate to be your friend and so fortunate to have this community together to really understand that we only see what's on TV, but having someone that you love and care about telling you, having these conversations, it hits home so differently. And I just want to say thank you, Lance, Michael, Jen, Jordan, and Nadia for your time and your emotional labor. If I had money to pay you all for this, I would. Maybe one day I can.
Maria, I do this for you, so you good.
Thank you.
I don't need it.
I know we're short on time, Maria, but I just wanted to point out one thing that Lance said that I think is so important to relate to everybody. When Lance said, I'm just so angry, I'm so angry, and then he, after that, just said, you know what, I can't even be mad. That feeling is just exactly how I felt today. It's it's on one end of the spectrum, you're so mad and you just can't believe it, but then at the same time, you're like, well, honestly, I didn't expect anything better. And I think that puts Black people in a very it's a position that is hurtful because once you get to that point where you're just like, I didn't expect anything better. I'm not even it's such a hopeless and helpless feeling, but mixed with the rage that leaves Black people at this point of, well, what am I supposed to do next? And so I just wanted to point out, I noticed, Lance, that I didn't know the answer that you were going to say to this question. Me hearing Lance's response was not rehearsed, and I just identified with that so much, that feeling of I knew that this is what it was going to be. I know that this is how it is, but I'm so angry, but I'm just so helpless. It's a very difficult emotion to process and to know what's the right thing to do after feeling that. So I know we're short on time, but I felt like that was important to point out.
And I know, like, sorry about this, but, and the worst part about it is, yesterday I was talking to my girlfriend about it, and she was like, we already know what's going to happen. And I actually tried to hold out a little bit of hope.
Oh, no. Oh.
So, like, at this point, like, man, I don't care. Like,
oh, God.
But again, just know, like, this community, like, this is a brave and safe space. And so, and I do encourage all participants and facilitators, like, be honest and vulnerable with yourself, with your emotions. Even if you can't identify exactly what that emotion is, just talk through it with, especially in your breakout. And that's where I'm going to segue into this, just because our breakouts are going to be very short tonight, just because tonight's focus is listening. And for my facilitators, please, I would just encourage you to focus on the listening portion. And then we'll come back for the large forum. So again, we're going to go into breakouts, so make sure that you click join.
Okie dokie.
All righty.
Maria, can you repeat the question?